மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
I want to show a nice attacking game. It's a game that I played several months ago. I actually played this in Indonesia, a small tournament where I was only American player, one of the only foreign players, and it wasn't a great event for me. But I did have a couple nice games. This being one of them. I was playing a very young kid, unrated FIDE, and in contrast with the last two games that I showed, in this game I wasn't able to crush him immediately. I had to kind of build up a kind of slow, methodical attack, and I thought this game will be a nice demonstration of how to actually organize an attack and carry through with kind of the final tactics to win the game. So let's go through the opening. D4, knight f6, bishop f4, e6. Pretty standard setup, at least within the first few moves. Knight d2. And in this position, my opponent played a pretty rare move, knight bd7, which it's a playable move, but often this can happen in London where your opponent might choose some slightly different setup, and sometimes you have to react to it. In this case, knight bd7, I would argue that it's somewhat of a mistake because the knights kind of run into each other. Some cases this isn't a problem, but in this position, there's not as much coordination among black's pieces as he would like. So going forward here, I play knight f3, bishop d6, and as I had mentioned in the first lesson, usually the rule is when these bishops are staring at each other, white should typically drop back to g3. But I realize in this position there's another option which is actually a bit stronger. The move I played is knight e5. And the point of this move is that black can't get away with taking the knight. If we notice, if knight take e5, I would simply take back and fork the bishop and the knight and just win a piece. And meanwhile, if bishop take e5, I can very simply take back with a pawn. And this knight is very short on squares. And he really can't get away with a move like knight e4, because after knight take e4, knight take e4, or pawn take e4, I would have a few good ways of continuing here, probably queen d4 being the simplest, and just winning the pawn. So going back, this knight on e5 is actually a really nice piece, because it just controls so many squares, and it enables either my queen or my knight to come to the king's side at a later stage. I also want to mention that a knight on e5 can lead to various tactics. And there's actually perhaps two possible traps that black can fall into after knight e5. The simplest being b6. Looks like a natural move to develop the bishop, but it just gets severely punished with knight c6, and white would then be trapping the queen. Another trap, maybe not so simple, after pawn c5. White has very direct way to win a pawn. And if you don't see it immediately, I would encourage you pause your video and find the move for white to win a pawn. The move is knight take f7, and this is a tactic you'll see very often in London, especially when you see this configuration: bishop on d6, knight on e5, bishop on f4. If the bishop on d6 is not defended, then you of course want to look for these sort of knight sacrifices. In this case, it's not a sacrifice, because after king take f7, bishop take d6, and white is doing very well here. So going back, black has to be a bit careful here in terms of how he develops, and there's not too many moves to play here actually for black. He chose probably the best move, just castling. Then we complete development: bishop d3, queen e7, c3. With the purpose being that if he ever plays c5 with perhaps some idea of c4, I would want my bishop to have a square to drop back to, so it can stay on this very nice long diagonal. Very typical move that we'll see in the London quite often. It's also a very flexible move, because I'm not sure if I want to castle kingside, or if maybe someday I want to castle queenside, because it's very possible I will want to advance my kingside pawns, like g4 or h4. So sometimes when you're not sure how to proceed, you want to play the move that you would be likely to play in any sort of scenario. He plays c5, queen f3, And queen f3 is actually a very typical attacking idea. Rather than bringing my knight to f3 right away, I would like to have my queen be on a better attacking square. In this case, I'm thinking about either queen g3 or queen h3. So he takes, we trade on d4, and then he captures on e5, which maybe isn't the best move, but it's already difficult to figure out what to do for black, because it's the position's a bit paralyzing. I should also mention that a move like b6 just runs into knight c6, and his queen's attacked, and the only safe square for the queen would then lose the bishop, so queen e8. And then I'm actually trapping the rook too. So I realize in this position it's not easy for black to come up with a clear plan. And perhaps bishop take e5 is not a bad move given the situation, but it does allow the white pawn to come to e5. And this is something we'll see very often in London. A pawn on e5 not only gives white a lot more space, but it enables white to carry through with perhaps a much more dangerous attack. And there's actually a general rule in chess. This applies to many other openings, not just to London. If you have a pawn on e5 and you're white and your opponent's castle kingside, it's a sign that you should try and orchestrate some kind of attack. So in this case, I'm attacking the knight. Only safe move for the knight is knight e8. And I mean, it looks very pleasant for white. It seems like I'm going to have a lot of fuel, but the actual attack was not easy to convert to a winning advantage, as we'll see. So I start with perhaps the most direct move, queen h5, threatening the simple mate in one. This provoked f5. And f5 is actually a good response from black, given that if I take en passant, he can very easily recapture with the knight. And white would be maybe running out of steam, given my queen's then attacked, e5 is coming. So after f5, I do have to figure out how to proceed. And what ends up happening is the structure becomes pretty much locked in the center. I decided to play knight b3. And then it was a matter of kind of developing some long-term plans. Now, I do want to explain knight b3. It's a pretty simple idea. Black was intending to play knight c5 and knight e4, and if he were to get his knight to kick my bishop and then land in e4, it would be quite annoying. So I played knight b3 just in sense of prophylaxis, trying to discourage knight c5. Though he did play knight c5 anyway, and then we trade. So tick, tick. And then, I mean, if we try and evaluate this position, it's clearly better for white. It's just a matter of finding the right plans. And given that the center is locked, I want to be able to find some plans on the wings. And of course, in this position, it's clear that I would like to make progress on the king side. And with this structure especially, pawn on e5 and pawns on d5, e6, and f5, the one major pawn break to consider here for white is g4. And we'll see how the game continues, but eventually I do play g4. It was just a matter of building it up. So first I start with just a simple improving move, bishop e3. Realized my bishop had no purpose on f4. I attacked the queen in doing so, and I also prepare to play pawn f4. So after queen to c7, pawn f4, b6. Now we reach a position I have a bunch of options. I could play g4 immediately. I could castle queenside. I could play rook g1. I do want to show maybe the most direct option, because g4 does look pretty attractive here, aiming to take advantage of this pawn, which is pinned to the h7 pawn. The issue with g4 is that black could very simply play g6. And if I play a move like queen h6, black can then play knight g7, and the position is relatively solid for black. So I wanted to be a bit careful with timing. Going back here, instead of playing g4 right away, I start with rook g1. And usually, if you have a pawn break in mind, sometimes it's best to optimize your pieces before you carry through with a pawn break. If we imagine it's my move now, and I can play g4, a move like g6 could run into g take f5. So it's opening up some more opportunities for white. Game continues, queen e7. And again, I'm just concerned about optimizing my position before I break through. I castle queenside. I think it's important to get the king to a safer position, also enable the rook to come in if necessary, so now the rooks are connected. So if the g-file ever opens, this rook on d1 could play a role in the attack. So, knight c7, with the idea of bishop a6. And the big theme in this game was restricting my opponent's play before carrying through with my own play. Bishop a6 is actually a somewhat annoying threat, because this is one of black's worst pieces, and I would not like him to activate it in any way, especially perhaps trade it off for my very good bishop on d3. So I played just a simple prophylactic move here, queen e2, preventing the bishop from activating, slowing down any sort of progress that black can make on the queen side. And I should mention a move like a5 preparing bishop a6 could run into something like bishop take b6, where I'm just winning a pawn with nice position. So he played the other developing move for the bishop, bishop to d7, and now I go for g4. Given that, I want to open up more lines, and in this case, I not only want to open up the file for the rook, but I also want to open up the diagonal for the bishop. And especially if it's a closed position and you want to attack, usually you have to go for some type of pawn break like this. And of course, my opponent doesn't want to open up the position too much, so he's not going to taking on g4 would be probably just a disaster for black, given that I could take back and then most likely triple up on the g-file, and if necessary, push the h-pawn forward. And white would be having all the fun here. So he left the tension, and he played b5, going for some kind of attack of his own, perhaps considering this move, pawn b4. So I played another improving move and another preventive move in this position. I played the simple queen f2. And the idea is to simply slow down black's plan of b4, given that I have this immediate threat of bishop c5. And a position like this is great, given that I have the bishop pair, but especially the dark squared bishop can just dominate all the dark squares, given that black doesn't have a dark squared bishop of his own. So all these dark squares are not only useful for defending, but they're also useful for attacking. So this prompted black to play queen f7. And now we reach a somewhat important moment, because it wasn't actually clear how to proceed in this position. So if I go ahead and I take on f5, then he would just take back and then have a very nice square for his knight on e6, blockading any sort of attack and also controlling the g7 or defending the g7 pawn. So I didn't want to go straight ahead and capture on f5. So I do want to give the viewers a chance to stop and think in this position and figure out how to proceed as whites. It's not that obvious. There's no immediate tactics, but when you can start searching for ideas and perhaps searching for tactical ideas, then hopefully you can come across perhaps a strong continuation. So I would recommend take at least 2 to 3 minutes to figure out white's next move. Okay, so before I go ahead and kind of show what I played, I do want to talk about my thought process in this position, because there's so many different candidate moves that white can consider, and usually when I'm in a situation like this, I want to at least identify all of the potential options, not only the options but the resources. And a resource could be a move, it could be a combination of moves, it could be some kind of long-term idea, just anything that could be potentially strong in the position. So what I'm going to do is just go through all kind of the potential resources, both attacking and strategical, that white can play. So obviously, as I mentioned, pawn take f5, it's a resource. It would open up the g-file. A resource like h4, h5, h6 is a potential plan. Some idea of doubling or even tripling up on the g-file, another very logical attacking plan. Something like bishop to c5 and bishop d6 is always present in the position. What else can we look at? Perhaps queen h4, going for some more pressure against this h7 pawn. Also, maybe a very simple, just waiting move like king b1, seeing if black would perhaps do something to harm the position. Of course, king b1 probably not the move you would like to play in a situation like this. I was also looking for ideas of perhaps combining, like taking on f5 and then eventually playing e6. And this is perhaps a more hidden resource. And if I were to play e6, I would want to have my bishop on d4. Just to wrap things up, I'll just show one more resource, probably not a good resource, but perhaps bishop b1, queen c2 to form some battery against the king. And when you're doing an exercise like this and you're trying to at least identify all of the attacking options, you want to be as creative as possible. And I think with all the arrows here, I know maybe it's a bit overwhelming, but we can see there's a lot of different creative ideas that white can try and employ. So let's get rid of the arrows, and let me show you how I continued. The move that I played is bishop to d4. And this is actually a very strong move. Even though the bishop doesn't look like it's doing too much on d4, it has a very nice tactical threat, which I kind of alluded to just a few seconds ago. And it creates a very difficult tactical threat to stop. And my opponent was completely unaware of the threats. He went ahead and played a5, which I was very much looking forward to him playing this move. And now white can carry through with a very nice combination. So if you want to try and find the continuation for white, pause the video, white to move, and get absolutely crushing attack. Basically, white to move and win. Okay, so the move is g take f5. Just very simple, starting out, opening up the g file, forcing e take f5. And now it actually looks like there's two appealing options for white. Let me start with the lesser, stronger option first. Looks like white can get away with e6, which is still winning. After knight take e6, white would then have rook take g7, and after knight take g7, rook g1, and this is going to lead to a decisive advantage for white, as rook take g7 can't be stopped. Let's say black just plays some waiting move, e4, white will take on g7, and the queen for rook and bishop is enough material to win the game. So I saw that, but then I realized there's a much stronger option. Instead of playing e6 right away, I can play rook g7 first. And sometimes when you're calculating combinations like this, you want to look for variations in the move order. By that I mean mix up the move order. Start with maybe the second move as the first move, see if it makes a difference. In this case, after rook takes g7, queen takes g7, it makes a difference because after e6, I then attack the bishop with, or I attack the queen with my bishop, and I still have rook g1 on the horizon. And black is just completely falling apart from this position. We should note that if the queen tries to run away, let's say a move like queen e7 is played, then I have the very simple queen g2 check, and this is just forced mate, given that the king has no squares to move to. Queen g7, queen takes g7 would be mates. And meanwhile, the black queen has no squares. A move like queen g4 runs into rook g1, or even taking on d7 and then rook g1. So my opponent fell apart pretty quickly here. He played the only tried knight take e6, but after bishop take g7, and then queen d4, I was very much on the way to winning the game and really had no resistance after this. So I hope there's a lot of insights to be gained from this game. It's one of these somewhat typical structures that you can get from a London, especially after my pawn landed on e5 from this position. It was a matter of carrying through with a lot of different attacking plans. And I think another concept to take away here is the fact that I didn't commit to castling kingside too early, because I was aware that it might be useful for me to castle queenside, which ended up happening in the game and led to just a much stronger kingside attack. So I hope you guys enjoyed that lesson. I'll be back with another video lesson. Stay tuned.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.